Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. A Chinese warship came within 137 meters of a US destroyer in the Taiwan Strait, violating the rules of international waters, according to US command. This just a day before China's defense minister said in his first international speech that conflict with the US would bring in unbearable disaster. And yet, at Asia's biggest security summit, China refused the US's offer of talks. We ask, how dangerous is the unfolding situation? With me to discuss this are Liang Ren, former Taiwan representative to Indonesia and a former Deputy Minister of National Defense, and Raymond Song, Taiwan New Constitution Foundation affiliated researcher, and Charles Wu, National Zhengzhou University Department of Diplomacy Professor. Ambassador and Charles, a very warm welcome to the show today.
Hello.
The Taiwan Strait incident wasn't the only near-miss intercept within the space of a week. On May 26th, a Chinese fighter jet cut across the nose of a US reconnaissance plane flying over the South China Sea. Both incidents were topics of discussion at the recent Shangri-La dialogue hosted by Singapore. Let's take a look.
For 20 years, militaries from around the world have gathered in Singapore for the annual Shangri-La Dialogue. Government officials, analysts, and foreign press all come together to exchange ideas on security and defense. But with this year's event concluded, a growing gap in communication between the US and China has been the main topic of discussion. In one of the first speeches at the summit, US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was quick to denounce an incident involving a Chinese fighter jet flying dangerously close to a U.S. military plane.
We've all just seen another troubling case of aggressive and unprofessional flying by the PRC. So we will support our allies and partners as they defend themselves against coercion and bullying.
But this kind of activity isn't just taking place in the skies over the South China Sea. Once the summit was underway, Taiwan's military spotted a U.S.-guided missile destroyer and a Canadian warship transiting through the Taiwan Strait. Footage later released by Canadian media showed a Chinese warship coming within 140 meters of the destroyer and nearly causing a collision. Even though the transit took place in international waters, China is pointing blame at the U.S.
要真正的要避免这些，除了我们制定这样的规则，这些规则都是不得已而为之。我们要制定这样的规则，最好的办法就是我们各国，特别是各国的军机和军舰，都不要到别的国家领海和领空附近去转悠。
The comments come as China continues to operate fighter jets and warships around Taiwan, which it claims as part of its territory and has vowed to take by force if necessary. So far in 2023, close to 2,000 Chinese military aircraft have been spotted around Taiwan. Roughly 750 of those have breached Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. This space isn't Taiwan's territory, but it's used for defensive purposes.
Eason Chen and Jaime Ocon reporting. Charles, let me start with you. So stay away and mind your own business. That's what General Lee says the West should do to avoid future incidents. What do you make of that?
This is interesting. This time, I think Lee used, I called it as a moderated provocations. Because if you pay attention to the wording, he say, mind your, none of your business, take good care of your own vessels and your fighter jet, and take good care of your own territorial airspace. I think this is not even a deterrence, because we know the definition of deterrence. If you don't do A, I will punish you.
Raymond.
It cannot be taken overboard. It has to be examined case by case. In terms of Taiwan Strait, it's an international water, and any vessel, including any military vessels, has the right to freedom of navigation there. So you cannot conduct your vessels to interrupt with their navigation, which is unprofessional and dangerous. And in terms of airspace over the South China Sea, but it's say near Chinese territory, but not within Chinese airspace. So of course, it's another case of freedom of transit or freedom of overflight there. If that's the rule or the formula that every nation in the world should abide by, how come that Chinese maneuver their aircraft carriers near Taiwan. And how do you say that the Chinese military vessels ship around even the internal strait of Japan, like Taiwan Strait, which is, could we say that mind your own business, don't come here? But no, Japan didn't do that. Japan just watched it, but didn't interrupt their navigation there.
So on Charles' point about, that there wasn't a threat, wasn't followed up by a threat.
Well, it's not a threat, but it's a kind of justification Chinese wanted to elicit to support its claim that don't come near China or else, which is implicitly a threat, I will argue.
Okay. Now, can the Philippines avoid these sorts of incidents by minding their own business? In the open question sessions, a likely Philippines military officer challenged Lee. He begins by talking about what happened after Marcos visited Xi in China. Let's take a look.
The same month, Filipino fishermen were simply fishing in Philippines' exclusive economic zone, were harassed and driven away by China Coast Guard in violation of international law. The following month, your Coast Guard directed a military-grade laser into the Philippine Coast Guard vessel inside the Philippine exclusive economic zone under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. So while China is talking about dialogue, China's actions show confrontation. Thus, my question is, why is there a big difference between China's words and its actions?
Ambassador, in your view, is there a difference between China's words and actions?
There's a difference between that general and President Marcos Jr. The president is more restrained toward mainland China, but this general is more strident, more coarse in his language.
But I think he's disappointed because after the meeting with...
But you have to take notice that since Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last August, China has gradually changed its anti-access littoral defense strategy. If you mess around at my doorstep, then you will be in trouble. So go away. Do your own business. Don't come over here.
But the Philippines fishermen, is that not China on the Philippines' doorstep? How can they butt out of their own waters?
Taiwan and the Philippines, those things happened in the past, including many fisher boat incidents in the past. Those are relatively minor matters that can be solved if they sit down and talk with each other. So that's he singled out the incidents, but that's solvable, manageable.
Charles, he did specifically say, in the same month that the visit by Marcos to Xi, there was the incident with the laser, there was also the intimidation of the fishermen. What's your view?
I think for Beijing, Philippines playing two hands cards. They will play one hand in economic engagement with China, while securely they ask the United States help. So they talk about EDC between Washington and Manila, but they also try to revise the economic partnership with Beijing on the South China Sea oil. We call the cooperation on the drills. This is one very important thing is when Marcos visited Beijing, he showed his attitudes toward cooperation. However, there's still some disputes on the Wisdom Reef, which there's a kind of the conflicts between the Beijing's PLA Navy and the Philippines navies. So this is very kind of bizarre and very complicated situation between Beijing and Manila. This is why we need to look in the future.
Okay, let's look at the message that the US and Canada wanted to send. They did send a joint mission through the Taiwan Strait during Shangri-La. So was it a provocation, as China says? Let's take a look at what Lloyd Austin says about increased US presence in the region.
We will maintain our vigorous and responsible presence across the Indo-Pacific. And we'll continue to work to ensure that no one country can assert control over shared waterways. In the South China Sea, we will continue to work with our allies and partners to uphold the freedom of navigation and overflight. And let me again underscore the importance of the 2016 ruling by the Arbitral Tribunal. It is legally binding and it is final.
Ambassador, what do you think of the message that US is trying to send?
Free passage. No matter what, United States, China, they all advocate the free passage in the international waters. But the United States sent the wrong signal at a critical moment when the Shangri-La dialogue is in session. Last September, the Canadian government also sent a frigate passing through the Taiwan Strait, accompanied by the American warship. No big fuss at that time. But this time, when we, on the one hand, we are talking about peace, stability, about how to accommodate with China's rise, this and that. But on the other hand, you are sending your warships go through the Taiwan Strait. So the timing is not right. But the passing through of the Taiwan Strait is okay.
Okay, Raymond, the timing wasn't right.
I think it's demonstrated the crucial importance that we have international rules to judge a state's behavior and their conduct. And without it, you cannot just say that, well, it's provocative or not. Actually, why the US and Canada wanted to make that gesture, firstly to assert their rights and also to deter Chinese any activities in terms of taking over Taiwan, which is, as Austin argued in his speech in Shangri-La Dialogue, say that's for the importance of the whole world, will cause a major disruption to the global economy and supply chain, and also for the freedom of navigation. To deter that, they have to take some actions. So in their view, that's the first breaker of the rules, is the Chinese attitude toward using military forces against Taiwan, which is against the whole community's, world community's interest. So that's why they have to take that gesture.
As mentioned, the Taiwan Strait Freedom of Navigation operation wasn't just by US destroyer. The captain of the accompanying Canadian frigate viewed the intercept, and here's what he said.
The fact that this was announced over the radio prior to doing it clearly indicated that it was intentional. Maneuvering close to each other, 150 yards is very scary. And you don't ever want to be that close to another vessel, because too many things can go wrong and you can actually have a collision.
To find out how serious these incidents are, my next guest is Tony Hu. He was working at US Air Force headquarters during the time of a fatal Chinese air intercept in 2001, in which the Chinese pilot died. Tony is former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan and Mongolia. I spoke to him earlier today. Let's take a look. Tony, 150 yards, that's 130, 140 meters. How dangerous is that for two vessels, traveling at speed?
It is very dangerous because, as you know, ships can't stop on the dime like car can. So this distance is less than a full ship length, and depending on the speed that they're traveling, this is very, very dangerous. And if you recall, in 2001, when Chinese fighter collided with the United States EP3, it's similar type of action. That airplane flew twice around the EP3. On the third time, it hit the outer engine of EP3, knocked over the nose cone of the aircraft, forced the EP3 to do an emergency landing on the Hainan Island, and which ended up, our 24 people got imprisoned for 10 days, and the United States had to write a letter of apology, even though it was the Chinese fighter who initiated contact. So it's very dangerous.
And back in 2001, tell us what the geopolitical situation, what were US-China ties, and what was the lines of communication back then?
Actually, the ties were pretty good in 2001, certainly not in today's environment.
So was that a lone, sort of like a Lone Ranger jet pilot doing this?
It was a Lone Ranger hot dog, we call a hot dog pilot, who did not have the skill set to do the things that he wanted to do. And but then this unsafe action that just happened recently in the last 2 weeks is similar to what took place in 2001. I think maybe many people started forgetting the danger that involves it. For U.S. commander of the ship or the aircraft commander, His job is do the mission and take care of the well-being of his people. He is not going to sacrifice the safety of his people to hot dog, to show off. I'm not scared of you. But obviously, the Chinese ship captain is willing to do that, and I don't think he thought about the unintended consequences that might come afterwards, the human lives that might be lost from these unsafe acts.
So do you think that basically the Chinese expect the Americans to avert the disaster, the collision?
Absolutely. They know that the American captain or the aircraft commander will take evasive action to protect the lives of the Americans on board. So they're counting on it. And unfortunately, they use this domestically in China as a successful intimidation action against the Americans. We scared them again, and they had to stop, they had to move to get out of the way because we succeeded in scaring them.
So do you think the US will be scared of this, and that is the way that they will react? Will they butt out of the region?
Oh, the US is not going to butt out of the region. However, individually, the US commanders will always place human life first, his own people. So you should expect the US commander to continue to take those evasive action to make sure no harm comes to his people. That is true. But US will not get out of the region because of this very foolish action by the Chinese military.
So what if a Hainan incident, which was fatal, where the pilot died, what if that happened again today?
Well, right now, many of the incidences all had video recording. And unfortunately, the Hainan incident, we did not have a video recording. If there was a video recording, the United States could have pursued it in international court. And also, because of lessons learned from the Hainan incident, I suspect if this thing happened again where our aircraft is damaged, the aircraft commander will try to limp to the closest friendly airport. In this case, the aircraft was 110 kilometers south of Hainan Island. The closest airport actually was Da Nang, Vietnam. And if he could have limped to Taiwan, he could have done so. Actually, I had a chance to talk to that guy, the pilot, afterwards when they returned. You know, apparently the aircraft was shaking so badly that he wasn't sure how long the aircraft would stay airworthy.
You mean the one in the on May 26th?
The 2001,
Right.
the EP3
Right.
guy, because they did come to the Pentagon after they returned to the U.S. and we had opportunity to chat with them. So if it happened again now, I think landing in China will be the last resort. Once again, human life comes first, but he will try to limp it to another airport that's not as hostile.
Yeah, and how about the geopolitical implications?
Oh, certainly. This is important. I think if China continue to do this type of aggressive action, actually, let me go back. Minister Li, during his speech in Shangri-La, and in responding to a question, he said, why is this things happening around China? And how come it's not happening in other countries?
So they class the South China Sea as
Right.
being China.
Yeah. So, or Taiwan-Strait, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, freedom of navigation that's conducted by the United States and other countries only happens when there's unlawful claim. Unlawful claim, because UNCLOS is pretty clear on the demarcation of what is international waters, where are the EEZs of different countries, and where are the territorial waters.
So that's UN law of the sea.
Exactly.
Yeah. An economic,
It's a United
Exclusive
Nations
economic-
Convention on Law of the Sea, where it clearly indicates, based on the continental shelves and all that stuff, the factors come in, and the overlapping claims on EEZ, how that get divided.
exclusive economic zones.
Yeah, exactly. So, but China doesn't follow that. Just like we mentioned earlier, the 2016 ruling by United Nations Permanent Court of Arbitrations saying that, no, China, this South China Sea doesn't belong to you. And based on UNCLOS, no, Taiwan-Strait is not your internal water.
So that was set in 1982,
Two, I think, yeah.
thereabouts. So
Yeah.
this was something that China was party to.
China is party to it, and they are a member of United Nations. And when General Lee said that, what are the rules? And nobody, no, you know the rules. You just don't respect it. So these are some of the things I think China was a little bit disingenuous when they say things like that, try to insinuate that United States is imposing rules. No, these rules are United Nations. The member nations voted on it and accepted, because UNCLOS controls the type of demarcation in every country in Africa, because everybody got overlapping claims, and where is the middle line that's fair for both countries? And almost all the country accepts it. So this is the type of things I think China, as a big country, they should set the example, accept the international rules, and just to say, oh, I don't know what the rule is, that's bogus.
Okay, we'll have to end it there. Tony Hu, thank you so much for joining Taiwan Talks today. Let's turn now to the visions laid out by the US and China at the Shangri-La Dialogue. Ambassador, in your view, were they alternate visions? Were they actually contrasting visions, or were they quite similar?
Recently, the United States has garnered or has formed a united front from Japan, Korea, down to Taiwan, Philippines, to the New Zealand and Australia. This is a sort of, to mainland China, sort of a NATO-like encirclement for them. So, but Minister Austin, he sent strong messages to mainland China that we are very strong. We will be staying here. We are very credible to deter your some kind of aggressive activities, even your assertiveness in the South China Sea here. And also to send a message to his partners in East Asian countries. Don't worry, rely on me, we are here. And also he wanted to send a message to other ASEAN countries. And for the Chinese, they want to use this, there's a wash of indictment about Chinese activities, military in the South China Sea over the Taiwan Strait. They want to send a message to the countries that don't mess around in our neighborhood. Taiwan is part of China, this and that. But we don't have to pay too much attention to what Minister Lee said about cross-strait relations or the status of Taiwan's status as regards to the China.
Why? Why don't we?
He's a military man. He's not in the political, it's not his turf.
So
he's a technocrat.
His words don't carry any weight.
No, he's just replicate what Xi Jinping's policy towards Taiwan. So don't care too much about what he said, because if you don't want to listen, you know what what's the content of his speech. So he will send a clear message to those neighboring countries. Yes.
Okay.
That we want seek hegemony, but don't do any harm to us. If you do anything bad to us, we will fight.
Raymond.
Well, great power struggle is not the whole picture. If that's of course, the Americans say from the position of strength, but that's not the only thing they say. Actually, it's endorsing, Secretary Austin is endorsing a principle which is a free and open Indo-Pacific. And he argued in that speech, saying that's to the common and compelling interests of the whole Indo-Pacific community. And he said that's crucial for the prosperity of this crucial region, and he will not allow any nation who could exert unilaterally control over the shared waterways. And he also indicated to the so-called the power of partnership, saying that American, while busy in building alliance, but they has this value shared, and also the principles they ascribe to. So that's why America could have the support of the NATO countries, like ASEAN countries. And so that's an important message that's behind those speeches. And also, if you judge the responses to the two respective speeches by the two defense ministers, there were 47 questions lined up to ask China. And the Vietnam representative asked, you said, generally you talk about equity, so where is our equity against you? And the Philippines asked the same questions. So again, those words, beautiful words, should be put into the examination of the common yardstick of the international community.
Let's address what Ambassador brought up about Taiwan. Now let's hear. Austin said that conflict is not imminent and not inevitable. So let's play the clip of where he actually says this.
Conflict is neither imminent or inevitable. Deterrence is strong today, and it's our job to keep it that way. You know, the whole world has a stake in maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The whole world. The security of commercial shipping lanes and global supply chains depends on it. And so does freedom of navigation worldwide. But make no mistake, conflict in the Taiwan Strait would be devastating. So we are determined to maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And so are a number of countries around the world, and that number continues to grow.
Charles, we heard Lloyd Austin there. So he seems to be saying that the US and other increasing number of countries want to maintain peace across the Taiwan Strait, so they don't want China to invade Taiwan. And I want to address what Ambassador said, which is China's position, or Xi Jinping's position on Taiwan, which he repeated in the speech, and he said, Taiwan must become part of China, and we will not renounce force, and we will do this at any cost. So which side seems to be trying to create peace here? Is it the US side or the Chinese side? And I'll let Ambassador respond afterwards.
Both of them want peace, actually, okay? So let's talk about Austin's words first. He expected to meet Li Shangfu this time because he met Wei Fenghe last year. During last year's meetings, those two parties, they have closed-off meetings talking about common sense support drills, which is they want to maintain certain kind of consensus on the red zones on the Taiwan Strait. However, this year, because Li Shangfu is still under sanctions, and also there's political issues between the two great powers, these two Secretary of Defense cannot talk to each other. This is why I think Austin really want to reiterate again, it's very important to maintain stability in this region, maintain status quo, and no country should one step forward to break this kind of status quo.
Which is the US policy.
Yes.
Yeah?
So I would say again is, if United States ready, if all allies are ready, Austin's war will be even more provocative. However, they know how to play around the cards, make sure the deterrence is clear, crystal clear, and Beijing know this is deterrence because the war or conflict will occur due to less commitment problems and less information problems. This is when we study conflicts, we know that.
Go back to my question. I don't know whether Raymond would agree with the premise of the question. Which side is actually advocating and then following through on peace? Because it seems to me that China is saying that they are happy to dispense with peace in order to take Taiwan, whereas the US is simply saying that it's trying to deter war.
Yes. To deter war means peace and stability in Taiwan State. Also means the maintenance of the status quo against any unilateral use of force to change that. And those are the principles. It's far ahead than the traditional understood strategic ambiguity, may I say that. It's time and time again the allies said that's to our own concern, and it's not a matter for China and Taiwan. It's for not only for all Indo-Pacific, it's for the whole world now. And so that's also very important to the maintenance of international rule-based international order. That's carried out by Austin. And also on that premise, U.S. said to ease the tension, to make information change, and to avoid a misunderstanding. Let's talk. Let's have dialogue. So that's the premises I understood.
Okay. Ambassador, I'll let you respond.
Minister Austin's words, on the one hand, is military assessment. The United States here, and the partners are strong enough to deter any expansion of any Chinese military power. But I think more important is political overtures. Don't forget, the United States is going to have an election for the next president. And Joe Biden is dedicated to be re-elected. So at this juncture, they don't have any military conflicts in this part of the world. Besides, the Russian-Ukrainian war is still going on. So this kind of political assessments must be incorporated into their decision-making process. I think this is very important.
So are you saying that what are you saying that that Austin is trying to get at politically then, in terms of the domestic U.S. politics?
Nobody wants the war.
Right.
That cause is too scary. You know, any kind of conflict in this part of the world.
And what do you make of of Lee's language when he says that China will not renounce force?
I think he's more reserved than his predecessor. His predecessor was very strong, used very strong language, and fight to the end, the last soldier sort of things. That's more reserved. Maybe his political basis is not that strong. He's new as a Minister of Defense. So he will not step too close to the political line because he's not expert. He don't know whether the red line is. So he's very conservative politically, but very assertive militarily.
But I think the message is quite strong, isn't it? At any cost.
Not as strong as last year.
Okay, fair enough. Let's discuss, because Charles mentioned, that in your view, it seemed that there was a practical obstacle to discussion between these two defense ministers because of the sanctions. Let's discuss the language that Austin uses when he addresses China's refusal to dialogue. Let's take a look at what Lloyd Austin says.
For responsible defense leaders, the right time to talk is any time. The right time to talk is every time. And the right time to talk is now. Dialogue is not a reward. It is a necessity. And a cordial handshake over dinner is no substitute for a substantive engagement.
Raymond, so, is it impossible for the two men to speak since the US has sanctioned Lee? So why should he talk to the US?
Well, sanction that was imposed by when Lee was in the Minister of Equipment and Supply Development, and because of the Chinese militaries bought some crafts from the Russian militaries, and that was the reason why. But it didn't prohibit or bar the performance of Lee's general as the defense secretary of China. And the U.S. officials said that very clearly, and it didn't enter into U.S. U.S. didn't exert any jurisdiction over Lee, and also dialogue doesn't mean that it has to be face to face or happen in real atmosphere. It could be over the phone, but it's not a reason to say that we will outrightly refuse any dialogue and any kind of exchange of views simply out of the reason that generally was in sanction list.
Ambassador.
Well, the Singaporean defense minister said that both sides talked to him that they want to talk. But to the Chinese, if a minister being sanctioned by the other side and they want to have a talk with him, it's a kind of a losing face. Face saving is a very important factor
for the
in
Chinese.
China.
Yes.
Yeah.
To the United States, you have to weigh the balance because we all worried about the disturbances over Taiwan Strait, South China Sea. If you really want to have talk, why not lift the sanction? Because to solve the tension, to solve the disturbances over this issue is much more important than sanction on Lee. Besides, Lee, at that time, China bought weapons, fighter jets, F-400 defense systems from Russia.
So this was following their invasion of
not China selling arms
Crimea.
to Russia. It's quite different. So if we would balance the lifting of the sanction is much easier, and to have conduct talks is much important than those things.
But given that it's a continuation of what happened in 2014, isn't it? The first invasion of Crimea, and now Putin has gone even further. There's a full-out war with Ukraine.
But
I mean,
China
given that
didn't
situation,
supply weapons to Russia. As vice versa.
But is that the only red line?
So if you are to impose sanctions or some kind of entities or sort of things, it's very easy to find excuse. But you have to think big. So this is a much small matter
issue.
compared to the tense situation in Asia.
Okay. Charles, small issue, they should simply just lift the sanctions. What's your view?
I have another argument is they talk about the Foreign Policy Department talk about lifting Li Shangfu's sanctions.
They have already.
Yes, actually, Blinken, they also want to talk to Beijing. However, we know that diplomatic sectors and also political sectors, they always usually talk first, and the political and security, military, or the other sectors will follow up. Think about that. If Austin talk to Li Shangfu first, without letting the Blinken talk to Beijing first, there will be some issues, there will be some misconnections. So I always say this kind of, we call understanding, mutual understanding, exchange opinions, great power communication, they should start earlier, even earlier than this year. But because the balloon issues, the diplomatic channels shut down, then I don't think Austin can have any chance to talk to Li Shangfu in this summit.
But the US did offer, the US itself did offer to have the talks, isn't it, at Shangri-La? So they must have been hoping, I mean, they probably said it's okay that Blinken hasn't spoken to his counterpart.
So this is why the Burns this time visit Beijing. They also reopen,
the CIA
rebuild,
direction.
yes, the diplomatic channels of the both great powers communications. We can expect probably next year the Shangri-La host again. If the two great powers want to sit down, talk again, probably those two Secretary of Defense, they can have some conversation.
As if there hasn't been some conflict.
Besides, the British, the Australian, Japan, Korea ministers, they all conducted side events with mainland China. Why not the United States? No.
So
they are all strong supporters of U.S. policies. But why they can conduct talks with mainland China? Why not United States?
Isn't that China that's standing in the way of that?
I want something up. In the early of May, PLA Navy has a joint exercise with Singaporean navies. They are not only doing this military exercises, they also have like mutual visits. So like Singaporean Navy invite PLA Navy to visit their ships, to their like naval museums. The same thing, the PLA have some culture and also political, security, military exchange with the Singaporean navies. So we can see they have China tried to build this kind of bilateral, multilateral security talk with ASEAN members, which is very important because ASEAN members used to have economic links with Beijing. They want United States for security help. However, now it's vice versa. Beijing have more connection with the ASEAN members in security. So I think Washington now they keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I believe he did mention 60. Was it the figure? 60 countries that they've done exercises with. But let's have a look at what Li Xiangfu said. And let me address this to Raymond. When he says they never tell you what the rules are or who made them, this is what he's talking about, the rules-based order. Let's take a look.
Some country, however, takes a selective approach to rules and international laws. It likes forcing its own rules on others, and even attempts to constrain others with a convention itself has not acceded to. Its so-called rules-based international order never tells you what the rules are and who made these rules. It practices exceptionalism and double standards.
Raymond, do you understand what Li is referring to?
Yes, he was alleging that the U.S. is exercising exceptionalism and trying to impose the U.S.-made international rules upon China, which is to China's disadvantage. That's the main thrust of his argument.
In respect of what? Is this a general?
And everything in respect of the navigation rules over the international strait, while China wants you to assert that the Taiwan Strait was its internal waters to ban the passage of U.S. naval vessels. Or in terms of South China Sea, when China views the whole waters near the littoral state of the South China Sea was his water under his jurisdiction, then he could avoid and to prohibit Philippines fishermen's activities, or the Vietnam's delegation to the concession to the oil and gas exploration. And that's according to China.
So they want it their way.
They want it their way. So that's they literally, in the case of South China Sea, China is saying that nobody made the rule for us. We could make the rule according to our own interest. In terms of South China Sea, we see all the waters are the waters under our jurisdiction, no matter how, no matter to the disputes raised by Vietnam or Philippines, no matter notwithstanding the ruling by the arbitral tribunal in 2016, which say that their assertion was without any legal justification.
That's right. And so when they say they never tell us what the rules are, what?
No. Actually, the rules, international was made by states, the community of states. In terms of South China Sea, that's a case, clear case in point. The rules with regard to waters under the economic zone of certain state was laid out in 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which China ratified and subscribed to it.
It just replaced Taiwan at the UN.
China
had
made
a seat
that
at the
rule.
table.
China freely entered into the 1984 joint declaration with the British, saying that we guarantee the 50 years of high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong. But so, in that case, it's not up to China to say that we will abandon this. We will say it's a historical document, which is make no sense.
Charles, I'll get you to react to the next clip. Is Li's or China's vision of the region shared by other nations? Actually, Raymond did mention this. Here's another audience member from Vietnam this time, responding to Li's speech. Let's take a look.
I would like to know how you see justice and equity be applied in the South China Sea disputes, where China has competing maritime and territorial claims with Southeast Asian countries. And to use, to borrow the questions that you eloquently raised in your speech, what are the rules and who make the rules? I would like to add, are these rules, are they or are they not anchored in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea?
Charles, so is this kind of view, is that surprising, or is it representative of, you know, the other countries in ASEAN, in the region?
This is always the controversies between ASEAN members in China. Okay, China, they know that the issue there, they pay very strong attention to their national security and national issues on the territories. They know that the territory issues is very hard to solve with Southeast Asian countries. So they use economic kind of engagement with Southeast Asian countries, try to lower down these kind of tensions. They use a term like joint explorations and put aside the disputes. However, the issue is still there, the dispute is still there, the territorial value is still there. So no matter it's Vietnamese governments, Filipino governments, they know how to peacefully settle down the territorial issues with China. But like what I say, you need to look into individual countries' policies. Vietnamese government, they are CCPs. They have very close connection with mainland China. However, civilian sides in Vietnam, they have issue with China. This is one thing China knows. So look at this time, China have even a naval exercise with Vietnamese governments. They want, they build these links, they call them norms or rules, okay, to solve the issues. However, let's talk about who made the rules. I also agree with, like, 1982, the UNCLOS is very important norms for international society to abide by. Now, great powers try to intervene these regions. ASEAN members, they know that. If let the great powers compete in these regions, they will get in trouble. So they use more we call the constructivism, liberalism, more this kind of mechanism, try to bring all the country into these regions. Let's see if either any of the country in the region really want to compete against China on the territory, they cannot win because they are small.
Ambassador, the reason why the U.S. is the U.S. welcomed, say, in the South China Sea, in the Taiwan Strait?
To the claimant countries, is yes. But to China, no.
Raymond?
Because China is big.
But China
the
is
argument
aggressive.
saying that we don't know who makes the rule doesn't give China an excuse to say we can go back on our own words. Tell people, Hong Kong people. It's not up to a big power to say that, well, we did make that promise, but I changed my mind. If that's the character of any nation, which is a nation which we cannot do business with.
Okay. Well,
least mention of the rules issue is try to let the United States know that even though in the past 200-300 years, all the international rules have been formulated or accumulated or being provided by the Western countries. But from now on, you must listen to other countries when making international rules. Don't bypass China.
That's the message. That's China's message. Don't bypass China.
And
let
don't
China
bypass
make the
ASEAN
rules.
people. They have their own ideas
They have
too.
their own ideas.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Ambassador Zhang, Raymond, and Charles, for joining us today. Hello, I'm Ian Kavat of Taiwan Talks. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Feel free to leave us any feedback in the comments section.